Hi everyone, it's Amy here from the blog I Think Therefore I Teach. Welcome to our next criminology instalment. This one is for Unit 4 and it is 1.3. So let's get started. This is describe models of criminal justice. Nice and straightforward, it's just a describe. First thing I got my students to do was to consider what they think our criminal justice system should focus on. Should it focus on protecting the public at all costs? Are we the most important people that needs protecting? So our criminal justice system should focus mostly on us, even if this means sometimes there are miscarriages of justice, even if this means sometimes suspects are taken into, are arrested, even though there's not a lot of evidence. If there is enough risk or the police in their judgment think this person poses a threat to the public, arrest them straight away. Or should we show more caution? Should we protect the individual's rights, the suspect's rights, so you should be considered innocent before proven guilty? So what comes first? Are they just guilty and then you prove them innocent? Or are they just, I suspect you of being guilty, I suspect you that you're innocent, we can't really prove the guilt, even if this means sometimes the guilty then might go free. So which way do you fall? And my class were quite split on this, and they gave some very good reasons for and against each side. For example, for protecting the public, we should be the most important. The police are trained in this. The police know the society that they're in. If they suspect somebody might cause a threat, they should have the legal right and authority to be able to arrest them to protect the public. There are more people in public, so kind of a utilitarian perspective is protect the masses, even if that individual, then there might be a miscarriage of justice. Whereas the other arguments for the should show more caution, it should be the individual. I think the biggest issue with that one is if you give police too much authority, what about things like their own police biases, such as racial bias or gender bias, that they might think that a black person, as we saw in previous units, they might be more likely to be classed as guilty when actually there's very little evidence to back that up. They just have a feeling, a hunch, or their own biases. And so therefore the first one, the A, says, yes, arrest them. The second one says, no, we have to protect that individual, we have to protect that suspect and their rights. This topic then looks at the models of criminal justice, including due process and crime control. Now, this is a really good topic because it's new. You've not learnt this before, so it's new areas that we've not discussed. So you need to describe these two models. That's what you need to know and be able to talk about for this assessment part of your exam. Synoptic links, left and right realism are going to crop up. Also, functionalism is going to crop up into this one. You also need to know about verdicts in the criminal cases, and your case studies from Unit 3 help as well. Right. There are two main models, as we've already just mentioned, the crime control and due process. Herbert Packer in 1968 was the scholar at Stanford University in the USA who defined these, so knowing his name is key, that's your detail. He was a criminologist. What are the models? They are ways of approaching crime in society. How should crime in society be dealt with? There are two models and they go against each other. Crime control and due process do not work together. They are separate arguments. They are two ways of approaching crime. And we're going to look at both of these. We're going to look at both of these and how aspects of our CJS, so our criminal justice system in England and Wales, can be seen to link to both crime control and the due process. So that's what we're going to do. First of all then, the crime control model, CCM. Crime threatens people's freedom, so the goal is suppress crime. The words in blue are kind of your key words or your key ideas to do with crime control. The model starts from the presumption of guilt. You're potentially guilty, let's put you away. It prioritises catching and punishing offenders, deterring and preventing them from committing further crimes. This is the idea of kind of a strict control. You've done something wrong, you broke the law, we're going to punish you. This will then deter them from doing it again in the future. This model advocates, supports a lot of freedom and authority to the police, trusting that they are able to identify those who are probably guilty through investigations and interrogations, so that they can act swiftly to catch and prosecute. So This kind of, as it says in the next bit, it cuts back the red tape. It cuts back the number of hoops the police have to jump through. If they think somebody is guilty, they should be given the freedom and the authority to act upon it. They should be able to act swiftly to protect us as the public. The CCM crime control model should be seen a bit like an efficient conveyor belt. Guilty, get them in. Suspect, get them in. Offender, get them in. So it's a way of processing suspects through as quickly and as easy as possible. We think they're guilty. Let's get the evidence. Let's put them away. Let's protect society. This is all in the interest of the protection of society and the victims. It allows the police to pursue those who they think are probably guilty. Even if wrongful convictions are made, this is the price worth paying. One person that has a miscarriage of justice is still not that bad and is still not a way to put us off this, when actually your aim is just to protect society. So it's a small loss for a big gain is how they see it. So the questions I got my students to research, consider and write down was how this can be linked to right realism and functionalism. So I got them first of all to research again functionalism and right realism, because obviously you did it in Unit 2, so it's this time last year, it's a long time ago. So I got them to research those and try and make links. That's your higher level. So when you're getting your 7, 8 and 9 marker questions, those links are what get you the good marks. I then got them to think about case studies. So I wrote a list of case studies on the board, the ones that we've studied, and I got them to think about how these could illustrate crime control model in practice. So pretty much this can be shown in any miscarriage of justice that we've looked at. So the Barry George case, they thought he was guilty, and so they, again, removed him as quickly as possible. It's how they treated Christopher Jeffries. Again, they thought he was guilty or probably guilty, so again they detained him. Sally Clark would be another example of this. So often with the ones we have looked at have been the wrongful convictions where they've had the power and they've dealt with it very, very quickly and very swiftly. You then have the due process model, the DPM. This model sees the rights of the accused as central. The individual requires protection, so the individual suspect requires protection from powers of authority that might try to oppress them. The role of the DPM is to ensure safety and fairness throughout. Therefore, it sets up a sort of obstacle course that police, judges and lawyers have to pass through. So it makes it very difficult, maybe more fair, when dealing with a suspect, of all the hoops that the agencies have to jump through to really make sure this person is actually guilty. And then they watched a short clip about the due process in America. It just helps to emphasise these words in a different format. So watching videos on YouTube does help. That's why you're here with me now. The roles of evidence in the due process are there to ensure the accused is treated as innocent until proven guilty. It's the due process that should be taken. Even if there are safeguards to ensure the person has the rights to be treated fairly. There are safeguards to ensure the person has the right to be treated fairly, such as PACE, e.g. rules of evidence allowed in court, how people are arrested, representation by the lawyers, informed of their rights, are to protect the accused. So we know the process of how, when a police arrest someone, the spiel they have to say, they have to make sure the person is aware of what crime they have committed. So you have to say why you are arresting them. They have to get the phone call. They have to be able to talk to a lawyer. And so all of these things, again, linked in with PACE, are what are in place to protect the suspect. The police have restrictions on their power to avoid abuse. This model regards the accused person's rights needing protection rather than the victim's or society, so correct and fair judgments are more likely. The main problem with this approach is that sometimes guilty people might be freed on a technicality. This is the price, however, worth paying to ensure that no innocent people are convicted. Questions, I got my students to link this to left realism and labelling, and then I got them to again work out case studies. So in this case, the Stephen Lawrence one is quite interesting. They treated Dwayne like the crime control model. You know, they had their own biases towards that Dwayne was black and therefore he was probably guilty, and so they didn't trust him and they didn't listen to him. Whereas actually the men that they suspected was guilty, they had to get enough evidence. The men got off on a technicality because there was evidence lost. There was no the way that the systems worked and the way they processed the evidence. It meant that they again got off on a technicality. They also, you know, even though society had, you know, the police suspected it because they did inside recordings of the men, the suspects. Again, they weren't allowed to use that because of a technicality, so they weren't able to follow it. They had to do a due process to protect the suspects. This one is harder to link to the case studies because obviously the ones that we've looked at, like Barry George, they didn't actually find the person that did do the killing. They realised that Barry George was the wrong person because they made the wrong decision, but they never actually then did the due process with another person. So this one again is a bit harder than the other one to do, but you can still make lots of links, and I'll show you how to do later on in this video. I then got them to do a quick quiz. Who wrote the two models? Which model does the CGS like a conveyor belt? Which example of due process approach does the crime control model take to police powers? And which one is the price worth paying? What is the price worth paying for the due process? So Herbert Packer, crime control, the rights of the suspect. They should have a little red tape and be allowed freedom to the police. And then guilty may sometimes escape justice. So the criminal justice system then in England and Wales, the two models, which model is central to our CGS? We can look at this in two ways: the rules our system is based on and how crime control operates in actual reality. There are many rules there to protect the rights of the accused person, such as arrest investigations, rules of evidence disclosure. So we already have a lot in place that would go with the due process model. These reflect due process, but also the rules which allow state more power in some situations, such as the judge can allow illegally obtained evidence if they think it's in the interests of truth. These reflect crime control model, that whilst they haven't done the due process, the evidence is absolutely fundamental to getting these criminals off the street. And so I got the students to read an article on James Bulger and the killers and how they went through the European court. So you can easily find the article online. And I got them to highlight how it shows DPM and the CCM processes dealing with with James Bulger's murderers. Do you think the European court judgment was right? So I got the students then to actually start looking at our system in more detail. Consider these elements of our CGS, our current criminal justice system, and decide for each one, is it more crime control or more due process? So these were all the ones I gave the students. I gave them the students on a worksheet and got them to highlight. So two colours, you might wish to do it for yourself or just think about as you read through them. Does that show more crime control or does it show more due process? So for example, the right for the suspect to appeal is the due process. The Human Rights Act is more, due process. The judge's power for a juryless trial is more crime control. So go through and work out which ones our system links to more. And then again, I got them to apply these models, our model specifically, to these cases. Barry George, the Maxwell Comfort case, Colin Stagg, than any other. So again, I got them to try and make these links. Now they know a little bit more about each of them. Is there any other links that can be made? And then I gave them some answers as well. Barry George and Jill Dando, this could be linked to the due process model because the police investigation was thorough. Barry George was allowed to appeal. Decisions were challenged along the way. However, the CCM, the focus on Barry because he fitted a profile as a loner and didn't fit the norm. So because he was an odd bod, he was seen as guilty. So this was a crime control of you're odd, we're arresting you. Conviction was based on a single particle of gunshot residue found in his pocket. And I think that it was found in his pocket a long time later as well, if I'm correct in remembering that one. He was imprisoned. He failed appeal, so he was allowed to appeal, but these failed. And he was given no compensation, even though we then finally realised Barry George was potentially innocent. The Maxwell Comfort murder, DPM, eventual change in the law to bring in pace, but that was years later after the men were treated so badly. E.g., the police now have to record interviews. However, obviously there's more CCM for this one. The police were swift to target the three boys. These three young boys had been known for setting small fires in the area, so were a bit of a delinquent, bit of asbos, but that was about it. No, they live nearby, they do this bad thing, they've set fire to Maxwell Comfort's property and murdered him. Intimidation and harassment in signing confessions. When you look into this and you watch the documentaries on it, which I highly recommend, the police interviewed, they weren't allowed defence lawyers, they were interviewed for extensive time. You know, they were not treated well, they were intimidated and harassed and basically forced into confessing. The pressure on the pathologist in the trial, so the pathologist worked out a rough time of death. They then was pressured into change that time of death because the time of death that was originally found for Maxwell Comfort, the boys all had an absolute airtight alibi. They'd been at some working man's club, so they'd had loads of witnesses that were unrelated to them, so it wasn't just like their parents vouching for them. And so they put pressure on the pathologist to go back to say, oh, well, actually, the window might be a bit bigger, and so actually it might not actually been 11 o'clock, it could have been 12 o'clock at night. That meant then that their alibis didn't work and they were allowed to be arrested. Incarceration of the boys, they were just incarcerated. Colin Stagg and the Rachel Nichol killing, DPM, the judge threw the case out because of improperly obtained evidence, but it had to get to the judge's stage, so that he had been incarcerated for that length of time, but it had to get to that point where it was then thrown out. CCM targeted Colin Stagg because again he fitted the profile as a strange loner, and the use of CHIS to try to extract a confession. So again, the extraction of evidence in a very unfair way. How will this then look in the exam? There's about 4 slides coming your way now of different exam style questions, so you can have a go at writing them, you can use this to plan answers, you can use this to just help you, etc. So pause the videos as you see fit. Describe the due process model, describe the 2 models of justice. So quite straightforward. The first one is just describe the due process model, 3 marks, 3 points with maybe an example or a key word. So just make sure that you have 3 clear, very distinct points. Describe 2 models of justice, 4 marks. So 2 marks for each. Again, 2 clear points for each. Examples, keywords. So for the first one, focuses on liberties, idea that it's fair and equal society, restrictions on government and police powers, innocent is central, the CGS is there to create obstacles for a fair conviction, and again, what example could you give there? Link to left realist theory of crime if you get time. That would really ensure 3 marks. I mean, that would be a fantastic answer. You have very little time to do it, but that would be a brilliant answer. Describe 2 models of justice. The crime control outlines it there, the idea of zero tolerance approach, the conveyor belt, so those words in blue that I mentioned. The due process, again, obstacle course, the blue that I mentioned there, the idea that they're only guilty, the innocent people are acquitted, only the guilty are convicted, you have to jump through hoops, etc. And again, how this links to left realism. This was awarded 3 out of 4 marks because you would need to extend the why it links to left realism. You would need to talk about how it links more specifically to right realism, so zero tolerance, or how this links to zero tolerance. Maybe use some more of the words in blue, and of course, example. The examples are always the key. Describe how one model of the criminal justice system can apply to Colin's case. So Colin's case is there. This is Colin's case. Don't forget, in the exam, just like last year, you get little short case studies that you have to link. So how could you apply the DPM to this? How could you apply CCM to this? And which would be the better choice of how to deal with Colin's case? So Colin Chesterton from Newcastle claims he was being given wrongfully convicted of the charge of murder. He was found guilty by a jury at Crown Court with unanimous verdict. He intends to appeal his conviction, and his family have started a campaign called Free the Newcastle One. Colin claims the police failed to consider any other suspect and the jury were bribed to find him guilty. In addition, he believes the judge is related, sorry, that should be related to the victim, and this is why he was given the sentence of life imprisonment with recommendation that he serve 70 years. Oh, that's a big sentence. So this shows a lot of CCM in it. This shows a lot of crime control. There's a lot of unfair things mentioned here. You could do DPM because he was still allowed a jury, so that was the due process. He was allowed to appeal. That shows the DPM. So those are the links that you could make. Again, always be specific when linking, so use the specific language, the specific examples given in the example that you're given, the model that you're given. So for that one that's just been, the Collins case, and I gave me some for my students on a worksheet, but I kept it on the PowerPoint to help you guys. This was the mark scheme. No marks, nothing worthy. Useless. 1.1 to 3 marks, answers describing basic details, they convey meaning but lack detail. 4 to 6 marks, answers describe in detail how one model of the criminal justice system can apply to Collins' case. Answers communicate meaning with some use of specialist vocabulary, bits in blue. So this is a potential answer that you could do. Look at the length of detail, the link to the zero tolerance again, the specific links to Collins' case, the ideas of, they've said that this model, the CCM, defends the guilty unless prove they're innocent. So again, they've linked it to the CCM there. The CCM is linked throughout for that one. Again, how many marks would you give this? So read through it, how many marks? And this was given 5 out of 6. So this was given 5 out of 6 because it describes in detail the model of justice. You can just tell just by the sheer length of it. There is some use of specialist terminology, such as the assembly line and zero tolerance. Full marks would have been awarded if there was some reference to the criminological theories, such as right realism. So obviously right realism was mentioned because of zero tolerance, but it wasn't extended. It wasn't really, you know, they didn't really go into it. Or consideration of an area of law that promotes this model, such as the increased pre-charge detention time for suspected terrorist suspects. Final one then, the mark scheme also said, so the mark scheme for that question of Colin also said that answers could include these areas. That the most appropriate model is the CCM. This involves the repression of crime, because repression of crime is a nice phrase, being the most important function of the CJS, because order is a necessary condition of a free society. Collins' claims about the police actions would be relevant here. Criminal justice should concentrate on promoting victims rather than protecting the defendant. This could account for the judge giving him harsh sentences, because that was a really harsh sentence. 70 years was a harsh sentence. The CG process should operate like a conveyor belt, proving cases swiftly. So the criminal justice process should be like the conveyor belt. This accounted for Collins' claims that police failed to consider other suspects. If the police make an arrest and a prosecutor files criminal charges, the accused should be presumed guilty, because the fact-finding of the police and the prosecutor is highly reliable. This again, you can link it to Collins' claims about the case. So these are all the things you could have mentioned. The DPM could also link to Collins' case, as I said, with the fact he got a trial, with the jury, the fact that he was able to appeal. All right, folks, hope you found that one useful. You've got a bit about both, you've got a bit about how to link cases, and you've got some exam support help there. Everything that you need to be successful in your 1.3. Thank you very much for watching, everybody. Comments below, thumbs up if you found it useful, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out. Otherwise, bye for now, everyone. See you in our next video.